Hello, Brobs. We're back with the 6 Black Presidents. Black Blood, White Mask, U.S.A. by Dr. Auset BaKhufu, an exquisite snapshot of history in transition. And I believe we're on to Thomas Jefferson, his psychobiography as told by Mrs. BaKhufu. The speaker stated that Thomas Jefferson was a low-lived fellow, the son of a half-breed Indian squaw sired by a Virginia mulatto father. After the speech, it was voted that no one should vote for the half-inch and half N-word. I'm not going to say it because I'll get blocked somehow from the Johnny Cake papers. And it wasn't unusual for newspapers of the day to call Thomas Jefferson the Big N. So don't be shocked at the notion. Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President, U.S.A. Thomas Jefferson was the 3rd President of the United States. He was in office from March 4th, 1801 to March 3rd, 1809. Before his term as President of the United States, he served as Vice President to the 2nd President of the United States, John Adams. This service was from March 4th, 1799 to March 3rd, 1801. Jefferson's early life. Thomas Jefferson was born April 13, 1743. He was born in Shadwell, Couchland County, now known as Albemarle County, Virginia. His father, Peter Jefferson, was said to be half black, half Indian. Rogers, The 5 Negro Presidents, page 6. Apparently, Peter Jefferson looked or acted white enough to father white enough children in order to rear them in a white enough neighborhood. Peter Jefferson was said to be a very strong man who was very fond of the Indians in his community and found much pleasure in their company. Thomas Jefferson would never match the size and strength of his father, who was said to be of African ancestry. Peter and Thomas Jefferson found Indians fascinating and worthy of respect. The Jeffersons enjoyed talking with the Indians, and Thomas felt that he could learn a lot from them. Brody, Thomas Jefferson, and Intimate History, page 55, Buman and Patterson, Our American Presidents, page 15. More than 1,000 interesting items and manuscripts exist on Thomas Jefferson and his life in the Duke University Library, Durham, North Carolina. Lana? All right, I'm sounding southern now. Thomas Jefferson's mom. Thomas Jefferson's mother was said to be from one of the most prominent landowning families in Virginia. Isham Randolph, her father, was a rich seafaring slaveholder well known throughout the colony of Virginia. Adler Thomas Jefferson, father of our democracy. Maybe I'll just stop reading the citations. You can enlarge the screen and read them yourself. There is much literature about the ancestry of Jefferson's mother, but not a lot at all about Jefferson's father. Even in the 1981 Facts About the Presidents, from George Washington to Ronald Reagan and Jefferson, by Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., there is no documentation of his birthplace. His mother's birthplace is listed as London, England. Fawn Brody states in her book, Thomas Jefferson, An Intimate History, we do not know if Jane Rudolph Jefferson felt superior to her husband because of her English birth, whereas Peter Jefferson knew nothing of his own ancestry. Jefferson's autobiography about his mother's ancestors hints at such a conflict. Jefferson wrote to a friend that life with his mother was like colonial subservience. Does this mean that Jefferson felt enslaved under a white supremacist attitude, and that perhaps his mother's attitude toward him was indeed an indication that she felt her son also to be beneath her? Thomas was, after all, the son of a man who was half black and half Indian, ? So why did Jane Randolph marry Peter Jefferson? It is possible that he had deceived her by failing for white, until she got the scoop on his ancestry from the hood and saw his strange fondness for blacks and Indians. Of course, Mrs. Jefferson could have been aloof and uncaring toward her children because she was under tremendous stress and strain. Thomas Jefferson's sister, Elizabeth, was mentally retarded. Even though it is likely that Peter Jefferson was of African ancestry and had a fondness for blacks, still at the time of his death, he owned approximately 90 political prisoners, slaves. His son would own over 100 political prisoners at his death. Later in Thomas Jefferson's life, when asked if he remembered his first years at Shadwell, he said in his squeaky voice that he remembered nothing. His earliest memory is of being lifted onto a horse at age 2 and riding with a black slave for 3 days from Shadwell to Tuckahoe. Who was the so-called slave? A relative of whom Peter Jefferson trusted with his young son? The many-faced man, Jefferson's adult life. By the time Jefferson became a man, he was already over 6 feet tall with large hands and feet. But he still did not reach the large size of his father. One interesting feature was Thomas Jefferson's red hair, which he wore in a ponytail like many young African and white youth of today. Jefferson's unique look deemed him the nickname of Red Fox. Red Fox, the late comedian of television fame, was also nicknamed for his red hair. Thomas Robinson Hazard wrote a book called The Johnny Cake Papers, 1867 and 1915. The book was titled after the delicious Johnny cakes of a slave woman by the name of Phyllis, who Hazard's grandfather proclaimed to own. She was from Senegambia or Guinea. It is noted in this book that Hazard interviewed an old man by the name of Paris Gardner, who had been present at the 1796 campaign election of Thomas Jefferson. Gardner stated that a tree stump speaker for the campaign informed the listeners that he knew a secret about Jefferson that would certainly convince no one to elect Jefferson to be President of the United States. The speaker stated that Thomas Jefferson was a mean-spirited, low-lived fellow, the son of a half-breed Indian squaw, sired by a Virginia mulatto father. After the speech, it was voted that no one should vote for the half-Injun, half-Frenchman with a touch of bullfrog. Famous psychoanalyst and popular figure in the study of human development, Erik Erikson, stated at the second annual Jefferson Lectures in 1973 that Thomas Jefferson's parentage was obscure. He asserted that Jefferson was a man with a conflicted personality, with contrasting images in identity formation. There's more. Erikson labeled Thomas Jefferson the Protean president in one section of his lecture. This, Erikson said, shows a man of many appearances, a many-sided man of universal stature, but it can also mean a man of many disguises. Thomas Jefferson was a man of contradictory modes of action. He was the grand statesman one day and the simple, secluded farm-type man the next. Erikson wanted to know what was behind the facade, what was behind the mask of the many-faced man. Perhaps in trying to validate himself as a whole, normal identity, Jefferson was known to demean those who had less than himself. By calling them all half-breeds, others he designated the name pretenders, as if he were not. Jefferson was interested enough in the question of race mixture, and half-breeds, Jefferson's expression, to devise a mathematical formula of possibilities that constitutes who is black and who is not. Of course, he used the capital A to express pure white blood and the small a to express pure black blood, and any given mixture of either as MS. He said, let the first crossing of A, pure black blood, with pure white blood, capital A, which is half and half, be called a mulatto. If a mulatto crosses with a pure white-blooded person, then the offspring will be of 1/4 black blood and called a quarteroon or quadroon. Yet he doesn't say whether he would consider this person offspring black or white. But since the person is called a quarteroon in his mathematical terminology instead of a white person, then it is supported that the person is considered black African, especially according to the laws of America. which postulate that just one drop of black blood makes a person black or African. Jefferson said that the third cross clears the blood as if something is wrong with the black blood. His formula shows that if the quarter rune crosses with a pure white person, then their offspring will now have only 1/8 of black blood. Since their blood is virtually clear, then they are white. He calls these offspring octoroon. His statements and his formula show the quarter rune as still being considered a mulatto, black, and as mentioned, he states that the octoroon is cleared and therefore is a white person. Jefferson calculated and reworked this formula over and over again, probably trying to determine and decide what he should consider himself to be. He also stated that our canon considers 2 crosses with the pure white and a third with any degree of mixture, however small, as clearing the issue of Negro blood. Well, Jefferson's canon duped him because his constituents have proven in their discriminatory actions that they consider 1 drop of black blood as a black and therefore an African person. Jefferson's formula makes no sense, that is to the laws of America. The only way Jefferson's formula can be legitimized is if the mulatto, quarter-rune, octoroon subjects decide to fail for white, pass. And many of them could not pass because of their beautiful dark skin color and superb broad features, fortunately caused by the overpowering substance of their melanin. And black blood, no matter how small, from this point on, pass for white will be called fail for white, as explained in the preliminary treatise chapter when defining ourselves and them. Notice how Jefferson's formula is a continuation of mixed blood mating with pure whites, according to his formula, of course. If a mixed blood were to mate with the pure black blood, then the offspring is definitely considered black, African. It is a well-documented fact that many mulattoes, quadroons, and octoroons were sold into slavery more often than not. Jefferson as a multi-talented, multiracial. Thomas Jefferson is said to have been multi-talented. For example, he spoke fluent Greek, and at the age of 19, he built himself a flatboat and fantasized about sailing it all the way to Egypt. The Cometians, Egyptians, and African people sailed to the old world Americas in boats thousands of years before Columbus stumbled upon this land. Jefferson, being the genius that many writers have claimed him to be, understood this, and therefore probably knew that it was possible for him to sail his way back to Kemet. Kemet is known as Egypt today. Jefferson, good at any profession or talent that he set his mind to, won great acclaim in 1776, at the age of 33 as author of the Declaration of Independence. This author would like to take this opportunity to note that when a people have brutalized and enslaved another people, whether the brutalization be mental or physical, and force them to wash for them, cook and feed them, cultivate for them, be sexual with them, and in essence be a slave for them, then the so-called genius isn't really so genius. It's a simple matter of time. It's just that the so-called genius have had plenty of leisure time to think, study, read, play, have good sex, create, and invent. Even though Jefferson advocated independence for the people, he still had in captivity many slaves, political prisoners at his death. Some free blacks did own slaves, political prisoners, because, as mentioned above, many blacks lived in old America before Columbus was even born. Many of Jefferson's so-called slaves were willed to him from his father Peter, who is said to be part black. After Thomas Jefferson's wife's death, Jefferson was also left with her property, enslaved people, some of them Martha's relatives. 17 years after his wife's death, Jefferson became vice president and later president of the United States. The Bonapartes during the Jefferson era. It was during Jefferson's first year as vice president of the United States that Napoleon Bonaparte was wreaking havoc in Kemet by blowing off the nose of Hiram et Ket, the Sphinx, because he noticed that this beautiful female sculpture was built in the image of an African. Napoleon's attitude about race was apparently much different from the attitude of his sister, Pauline Bonaparte, who was reputed to be very fond of Africans. Joel A. Rogers states in some of his literary and historical works that Pauline preferred African men to her own white husband. While in Haiti, she was known to have had an intimate relationship with more than one African man. Thomas Jefferson was known to have had an African mistress. According to Robert Beverly, a colonial leader, Thomas Jefferson dreamed of the intermingling of blood as a public policy. Jefferson didn't just dream, he made his wishes come true with action as a personal policy. Webster said it. Thomas Jefferson's public service spanned 40 interesting years. He was legislator, governor, congressman, diplomat, secretary of state, vice president, and president of the United States. He also founded the University of Virginia, which was in 1991, running rampant with drugs, drug dealers, and many drug addicts. What's that have to do with anything? Many of the young white males at this university were jailed for their crimes. Jefferson was never jailed for his. Besides becoming president, Jefferson managed his leisure time well enough to also be a successful lawyer, farmer, philosopher, writer, architect, scientist, musician, inventor, slaveholder, and womanizer. Forrest McDonald from the University of Alabama stated on a 1991 television special that Thomas Jefferson was a great manipulator, but perhaps not as slick as Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon owned the territory of Louisiana. Jefferson bidded with Napoleon to sell Louisiana to the United States for $10 million. In 1803, they finally negotiated that $15 million, and this was only because Napoleon needed the money for war. Thomas Jefferson, who was not known to show up for congressional meetings, however, gave magnificent parties and manipulated Congress into getting whatever he wanted when he was president of the United States. McDonald said that Jefferson was the gentleman's gentleman, the country's squire. From research collected, it has been determined that Jefferson had affairs with at least 3 married women, which is engaging in illegal sexual intercourse. He also had children with his black mistress, a slave political prisoner named Sally Hemings, and other African women on his plantation. Some of his mulatto children were sold as slaves, which means that Jefferson also engaged in sexual intercourse for pay. The word that describes the actions of Thomas Jefferson is whore. Second, that's Webster's second. Look it up. Who has ever said that a whore could, should, or would only be attributed to a woman? And who is so arrogant to think that they have the right to make such decisions or determination? A man? The definition and position accept anyone. Pauline Bonaparte would probably be happy to agree. Jefferson's wife. Thomas Jefferson thoroughly enjoyed his life as a single man until he met and fell in love with Martha Wales Skelton. Thomas Jefferson and Martha were married January 1st, 1772 in Williamsburg, Virginia, at the Wales estate. They were married a short 10 years, 248 days. They had 5 children. 3 died at very young ages. His 2 daughters by Martha, who lived into their adult ages, were willed all of Jefferson's possessions. Thomas Jefferson had children with Sally Hemings, his African black American mistress, and these offspring received nothing. Martha died at the young age of 33. Jefferson vowed never to marry again. He did not, but he did have a serious, long, 38-year relationship with his wife's half-sister, who just happened to have been none other than Sally Hemings. Wait, his wife's half-sister was Sally Hemings? What? All right, that's a revelation. All right, that's all for today. Next time it will be George Washington. Goodbye.